Dan Mullen chasing those Georgia Bulldogs on the field and on the recruiting trail. We got Jackie Franchuli on the line from Gators territory on Arrivals. Please join her and the excellent work that she does right there. If you just see Jackie here covering Florida football, just imagine if you check out her work, because the insight and the information that she provides here is remarkable. Jackie, you have been busy, I know, so thank you so much for devoting some time to our coverage here. So thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
It's a class that Rivals has ranked as number 7 in the nation, 24 signed. Is there anything that stands out to you in regards to the way Dan Mullen closed in those final few days leading up to National Signing Day?
Yeah, I think a lot of Gator Nation might be upset of how Florida closed. I think it's just a perception where they didn't win any battles on actual early signing day on Wednesday. They actually lost a few battles. But if you consider what they did just a few days earlier, just last week, when they were able to flip Josh Braun, defensive lineman from Georgia, he's already on campus, and also flip Mordecai McDaniels from Tennessee. Those are 2 big wins on the trail for the staff, and that was just a couple of days before early signing day. And also, if you look at what the staff was able to do with, trying to fill in gaps into this class, because, for instance, we talked about this many times, Mark. When you look at the scholarship breakdown and the class balance, Florida was lacking balance in the interior defensive line. And Florida really attacked that in this class in particular. They were able to bring in Gervin Dexter, guys like Jalen Lee, and really attack get some depth in that interior defensive line, but also attack that secondary. Dan Mullen has had a rash of bad luck when it comes to secondary recruiting. If you look at some of the guys that he recruited, Justin Watkins, you've got Chris Steele, you've got John Huggins. They're no longer part of the program. And then you've got Randy Russell, who unfortunately for him had to get, found out he had a heart condition, and his career ended at Florida as well. So they've lost a lot of guys through attrition in the secondary. So Florida was able to get a lot of guys in the secondary, like Mordecai last week, and were able to add depth. And then I mentioned Josh Braun. And he was also a great get for them because they wanted to reinforce that O-line. So Dan filled a lot of gaps with this in particular class. I know they didn't get that flashy new addition on early signing day like they've done in the past. Last year they were able to get those Lakeland guys on TV saying, "We're committed to University of Florida." A couple years ago, they were able to get Jacob Copeland doing that on signing day. They didn't get that flashy guy on Wednesday. But you know what? When you look at the guys that were deciding on Wednesday, there was guys like Tim Smith, who was committed to Alabama already. So that was going to be a hard flip in the first place. The staff did manage to get him on campus quite a few times. But like I said, they did reinforce that D-line quite a bit in this class. So yes, Tim Smith would have been a great get. I'm not saying that he's not a great talent. But at the end of the day, he would have been a +1 for Dan Mullen. The one that, kind of stings a little bit maybe is Sam Brown. He committed to West Virginia over Florida. To be fair, Florida got there very late, but West Virginia did a very good job of courting the family. When you win mom over, when you win dad over, when you win all the family over, it's really hard to kind of take them away. And, West Virginia was there a lot more than Florida just because Florida offered them a little bit late. So also, you have to consider the timing of it. And also because of the early signing day and how everything works, you still have National Signing Day in February. So there's a lot of time to kind of correct some of the wrongs, like getting a running back, possibly getting one more wide receiver in the class. And then Dan Mullen and his staff has also done well in the transfer portal. And that kind of adds a new dynamic to recruiting now, especially when you look at signing days, because it doesn't seem like it really doesn't have an off button to recruiting. You're constantly recruiting, constantly trying to reinforce your roster.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Gators. We do that with Jackie Franchuli from Rivals Gators territory. Jackie, according to the Rivals board here, the number 2 and 3 ranked players in the class, Leonard Manuel, a wide receiver 4-star out of Fort Lauderdale, and Mark Brett, the defensive back out of Miami, just still verbally committed. Are there any concerns there?
No, they're still committed. They plan to both sign in February. The only issue that we have currently is we don't know if Leonard Manuel has done enough to qualify. That's something that we're continually monitoring. He has switched schools and everything looks like it's going to the right direction, but it's something we have to keep a close eye on. You know, if you asked me maybe a few months ago if Leonard Manuel was going to qualify, I would have hedged my bets and gone the other way. But now it looks like he's right on track. I should say more back on track. So we're still going to monitor that situation. Florida is still monitoring that situation. And it's something where, you know, they are looking for one more wide receiver. Dan Mullen was talking about that they have 9 wide receivers on the roster, including the signees, and they would like to get 1 or 2 more. So that's something that, you know, with the addition of Jordan Pouncey as a wide receiver, they're asking for the NCAA for a waiver, so he's eligible right away. So that's something that they're going to be monitoring as well. So yeah, Leonard Manuel is a big piece of the puzzle. And like I said, Mark Britt, a safety, is someone that they also really want to secure that class. Now, he just wants a little bit more time. But up until now, there's nothing to say that he's swaying away from that Florida commitment. And honestly, they actually are in play for Avante Williams, a very talented safety who's committed to Oregon. Florida might actually sneak in there and get him before the National Signing Day in February. So we're monitoring that too. So it's not like, I know a lot of people were upset how early signing day was, but there are a lot of guys that they're still in it and there's still a month to go.
This is the 7th rated class in the nation. Okay. That's the way it's rated right now. If we could do, and I mentioned this before, if somebody would go out there and take on the task of re-rating the classes 5 years later, that would be phenomenal. But nobody's going to take on that kind of an assignment. So you're in connection with the fan base on social media and the comments that come into Rivals. Georgia, they're higher.
Right.
That's all that you have to say. Whether they're number 5 according to Rivals, number 7, number 5.
Well, the problem that a lot of the fan base has, and I kind of agree with them as well, is the fact that yes, they're number 7 in the country, but look who's ahead of them in the SEC. You've got Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M. They're all ahead of them. These are the teams that you need to beat in order to really succeed and go to the playoffs. So I understand why the fan base sometimes is getting a little weary of it, because they've been hearing a lot, wait till next year. So I understand why they're getting a little bit frustrated. And honestly, Florida has done, I know people want to say, well, we don't want to have sunshine pumping. Florida did well in this class in certain positions, but they're still not doing well enough in the offensive side of the ball. That's something where they're lacking, trying to grab those skilled players. Jaquavian Frazier is a 4-star wideout and signee for Florida, is a great get for Florida. I think a lot of people are sleeping on him, although he's a 4-star recruit. He's a great get for Florida. Anthony Richardson, a 4-star quarterback, very good get for them on the offensive side of the ball, but they haven't signed a running back. They need to be able to keep guys like DeMarcus Bowman home. So those are the things they need to improve on moving forward, and they need to do that by beating those guys that are ahead of them. Beat the Clemsons, beat the Georgias, beat the Alabamas, beat the Texas A&Ms, because those are the teams that they're really fighting up against. If Georgia continues to recruit at that certain level, sometimes talent just wins. This year it proves that, because sometimes I always give the edge to Dan Mullen in coaching aspect of the game. When you look at between Kirby Smart and Dan Mullen, I picked Florida to beat Georgia this year because I gave the edge to Dan Mullen's coaching. But at the end of the day, Dan Mullen was working with 62, 63 scholarship players because of injuries. And that's when the recruiting and depth comes in. And that's where Kirby Smart can go to the number 2, number 3 guy who just happens to be 5 stars and 4 stars too. So that is the gap that Florida is working on right now, which is why they really need to kind of dig deep, because the rich are just getting richer. So they need to figure out a way for them to get the rich themselves. Maybe the transfer portal is a way to go. They've already proved with John Grenard, Van Jefferson, Trevon Grimes that they are successful by using the transfer portal. But that's a Band-Aid approach. At some point, you need to work at the ground level and be able to recruit these high school athletes so they can develop them and not worry every year about getting a grad transfer, because John Grenards don't grow on trees.
My point was going to be basically that Georgia brought in the 5th rated class and Florida the 7th rated class. There's no way of knowing which is going to be actually the better class. It's just that close. Now, if it was the 5th rated class against the 27th rated class, we know how that's going to turn out. But number 5 versus number 7. But when Georgia is continually bringing in a top 5 class, and up until now for Florida, not Dan Mullen's work, but the previous coaching staff was bringing in more in the top 15 range. We know the gap exists on the roster. Dan Mullen has obviously closed that, but the perception is still behind. Again, it may turn out to be a better class, on the field. We shall see. It's certainly very close.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also you have to give Dan Mullen and his staff credit. They're not just recruiting guys for their stars or recruiting guys because, they're a top talent in that state or what have you. What they're doing is they're looking at the class balances, something that we've stressed so much on Gators territory. We actually have a scholarship chart on our message board to really kind of dissect each class and each position to say, this is how many defensive tackles are, redshirt seniors or redshirt juniors this year. So you can see where the gap was before Dan Mullen came to Florida. So Dan Mullen and his staff, what they did is they realized where the gaps were, and they've tried to recruit more guys in those positions and kind of tried to spread the wealth a little bit. Because, last year when he got here, 2 years ago when he got here, he realized defensive tackle, he had no one for 2 classes. It was just flabbergasting how Jim McElwain kind of let that kind of spiral out of control a little bit. So they had a gap of 2 classes where they didn't have a D tackle. That's going to be a problem. So they were able to get a lot of good recruits, and some of these recruits, they're program changing guys like Gervin Dexter, like Derek Wingo, linebacker, 5-star linebacker on Rivals from South Florida. Those are game changing, program changing guys. So the problem is never on the defense side of the ball. I think Florida's defensive haul this signing day was quite impressive, and I don't think a lot of people disagree with you on that. They just have to translate that success on the defensive side of the ball to the offensive side of the ball, figure out what's going on there and how they can take the next step. But again, I don't want to hold judgment too much on this recruiting class yet, on anyone's recruiting class, because there's still that February one, and there's still a number of guys that Florida is in. Henry Parrish is a running back target that's going to have an official visit in January 24th. Florida's done well with them lately. They're competing against Ole Miss. And, they're also going after Jahmyr Gibbs. That's another running back target. So there are options out there for them. And obviously you then add the transfer portal in there. So I think the time to evaluate this will probably be around February. That's when you can really say what Florida has accomplished compared to Georgia, and just not even just the rankings, but just see how Dan Mullen is able to really get the balance back on this roster, because that's been a problem for them on the O-line, on the D-line, at wide receiver. That's been a problem for Dan Mullen when he got here. That was a problem he inherited. So now he's slowly fixing that. It's not an overnight success because you're still dealing with scholarship limitations. So you can't just, recruit that in a year or two. It takes a couple of cycles and maybe a couple of transfers to really change that balance, which is why I assume they're leaving a couple of scholarship numbers from what I'm told for entering a transfer portal, maybe get a grand transfer or a guy that, might help him in the 2 years rather than next year's class.
Jackie Franchuli from Gators territory on the Rivals platform, joining us to break down Florida's National Signing Day version number one. So that's about 85% of what should be the final class, with some key pieces still left to be played, as Jackie just outlined. Jackie, thank you so much for stopping by as always.
Thanks for having me, Mark.